Well, it's good to see everybody. Let me say two things before I get into the message for tonight. First of all, I found out on Tuesday that I have pneumonia, which is miserable and has been miserable for me all week long. I've been totally sick, totally down and out, haven't been in the office all week. Rumor has it it's been a beautiful week outside. I wouldn't know. I've been in bed all week, but I have a strategy for making it through the next 30 minutes. You'll notice they were even kind enough to bring me a chair just in case I need it. But I tell you that only because I'm not going to be hanging out in the Commons area. None of you want me to be out there afterwards, but I will catch you next week to greet you in person. Second, we only have 2 weeks left of this series, Good News for Bad Christians, which makes me think just a couple of things. First of all, if you still know some bad Christians who haven't been here yet, you only have 2 weeks left to invite them for the rest of this series. But maybe more important than that, the readings that we've been doing every day, I have had so many conversations about where they've been really, really helpful to people. And I think this habit of hearing from God every day by at least taking a shot, say, I'll read a chapter of the scriptures, I'll see if God captures my attention with something, I'll think about what he might be saying to me, is just one of the healthiest practices a follower of Jesus can have if they want to really, have this daily spiritual experience with God. And so a lot of you have been doing that very consistently, but I'm also pretty confident, a lot of you are new. I've met so many people who are new to Suncrest this summer. You can jump in just for these last 2 weeks. The readings are on the bottom of the program or they're in the app. You can jump in, just start out fresh. Some of you, I'm sure, started the readings, and maybe it faded for you at some point this summer. I know I went on vacation this summer, and my rhythm got out of joint on a few things, including the readings for a little bit, and it took a little bit to reset there. And you could just jump right back in. We can finish these 2 weeks strong. Some of you have been blowing me off all summer long about the readings, right? But today's your day to stop blowing your pastor off, and now you could jump in and start reading the scriptures every day. So I hope that you'll take advantage of that as we wrap this up over the next 2 weeks. 1 Corinthians, a section of the Bible that we've been working through, is this fascinating letter from the Apostle Paul to this church in Corinth. Today I'm going to cover chapter 15, and next week is the last chapter, chapter 16. It's pretty common for Paul to end almost all of his letters with the themes that we're going to talk about the next 2 weeks because of how important and practical they are to our faith. So to get us kind of set in the right context for today's message, I want you to think about which end of the spectrum you fall on as it relates to the ways Christians think about things. So if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can just take a pass on this little survey here. For the rest of us, it'll be a little bit of a self-assessment. And let me frame it maybe this way. C.S. Lewis, who's one of the smartest Christians who's lived in the last 100 years or so, would write at times, and one of the things he said about Christians was this. He said, sometimes people who are Christians are so heavenly minded, they are no earthly good. Christians are so heavenly minded, they're no earthly good. And you probably kind of capture what that means. There are people who walk around, they kind of have their head in the clouds, right? Or they're always thinking about, this or that, or God, or future, or heaven, or whatever. And they never kind of bring their gaze down to say, yeah, but I have a role in this world here on earth to do something here. Some Christians fall on that end of the spectrum where they're always thinking about heaven. They're always thinking about the future. They don't even pay attention to what's around them right now. The other end of the spectrum, though, is also a place where people sometimes get stuck. And that is, they don't think about heaven enough. They actually kind of go through every single day, and what they think about every single day is every single day. We just think about the day that's in front of us and the chores that are on the list and the things that have to get done at work and the tasks that are ahead of us and the stresses about paying the bills, all those things. And it kind of just consumes our whole life so that maybe once a week when we gather like this on a weekend, we would lift our gaze to the heavens and remember, oh yeah, there's someone we worship. There's someone who has promises for us. There's someone we can have a relationship with that is God. And almost every follower of Jesus has a tendency to go one direction or the other on this. So I just want you to think about yourself for a second. Would you be more prone to be the kind of person who would say, yeah, I'm so heavenly minded, I'm not much earthly good? Or are you the kind of person who's kind of so focused in the daily grind, the day-to-day, that you miss it sometimes, that heaven, that God is part of this experience day in and day out? Well, I think no matter where you are on that spectrum, today's message is going to hopefully anchor us right in the middle where we ought to be. There's going to be a phrase that shows up actually at the end of this passage, and it's a very short phrase. You can memorize it if you want. The phrase that shows up at the end of this passage is, "Let nothing move you." Let nothing move you. Would you just say that out loud with me? Let nothing move you. One more time. Let nothing move you. The idea behind let nothing move you is that Paul is going to be encouraging all the people who are followers of Jesus to say, you're anchored to something, right? I mean, you are anchored to something. Like, yeah, the waves go up and the waves go down. Circumstances of life do rise and they do fall. Sometimes there's good things and sometimes there's bad things. That's going to happen. But since you're anchored, you're not just flailing. You're not just floating. You're not going to end up lost somewhere. You are anchored to something, and nothing should move you. And he's going to teach us what to anchor our lives to. Now, let me help you think about your life with this in a few different ways. Maybe one way to think about your life is just to think about your spiritual journey. And I know that phrase probably even means lots of different things to lots of different people. I'll just let you define it how you want to for this exercise. But if you think of your spiritual journey from childhood to where you are today, maybe just for a moment you could break that up into 4 sections of life, right? I turned 45 last week. I finally allowed my children to call me middle-aged. So 45, like it's about 11 years apiece, right? If I'm breaking that up into 4 sections. Yours is shorter or longer or the same, but just think about your spiritual journey, okay? And you go like to the earliest section of your life and think, oh, what happened in my life at that stage that caused me to either draw closer to God or feel more distant from God? What experiences did I have? What knowledge did I gain? What convictions did I embody? What happened in that, for me, my first 11 years of life? And then, if you think a little bit about that, and then where did it go from there? Like in your next section of life, did it go up or did it go down? Did it accelerate? Did it become more intense with your faith, or did it become more distant in some way? And why was that? What caused things to ebb or flow? Were they events that happened in your life? Were they relationships that you had? Were they experiences where you prayed and prayed and prayed and something happened? Or experiences where you prayed and prayed and prayed and nothing happened? Then what about the third quarter of your life so far? Is the trajectory pretty smooth? Did it start low and is it just consistently increasing all the way? Or did it start high and is consistently decreasing? Or is it up and down? What about the fourth quarter of your life? And all of us have these things in life that often shape us in significant ways, but they're really just circumstances of our lives. For a lot of people, when life is going good, they say, yeah, God. And when life is going kind of they say, God, where are you? And when life is crashing and burning, they say, I'm not sure there is a God. And it all is about the circumstances that they're going through, that we're going through in our lives at any given time. But you can start to imagine that people's faith journeys, when only attached to their circumstances of life, they're not really anchored to something. And what happens is our faith, or lack of it, moves significantly. Sometimes gets wiped out. Sometimes that's because of pressures on us. And honestly, sometimes it's because of pleasures that you want to take advantage of. You know, the life with God places some limits on your life, but you still desire to experience some of the other things of life. And Can you just navigate and negotiate some of those things in your mind? It's a really interesting study just to think about what causes you to be where you are on your spiritual journey. What I encourage people to do is to acknowledge that the circumstances of our lives, the circumstances where we sense that we see God at work, or at times where we feel like God is distant. I'm not saying they're not real. I'm not saying that they're not important in the stories of our lives. But I am saying they're circumstantial, and that if you're going to let nothing move you, it will be necessary to develop something in your faith that isn't dependent on how things are going. And wouldn't you love that? Wouldn't I love that? To live with the kind of confidence and strength that whether things are great or whether they're terrible, nothing will move me. That's what chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians is about. And he's going to help us understand it simply through showing us what is the foundation of our hope and our faith. So here's the good news. Our hope is found in the resurrection. Our hope is found in the resurrection. Now, when I say the resurrection, Paul is going to explore this from two different angles, and I think you'll appreciate both of them. The first is Jesus' resurrection, and then he's going to talk about our resurrection. So when we think about what holds our hope for the future, what would cause us to navigate this life in a way that we will not be moved, he suggests that it's the resurrection. Now, you've heard me say before, Christianity rises and falls on the resurrection of Jesus. And I know some people think I think they don't take the line of reasoning seriously, but follow this. Some people might say, oh, I disagree with this thing the Bible says. I don't think I could be a follower of Jesus. And I always think, really? Like you're going to decide not to be a follower of Jesus because of something that shows up within his teaching? I mean, that doesn't really make sense if you think he rose from the dead. Now, if he didn't rise from the dead, then you should not be a follower of Jesus. If you don't think he rose from the dead, you should not be a follower of Jesus. But if you think Jesus came from heaven, he lived on earth, he died, and he rose again, but he taught this one thing that I can't agree with, then you probably need to reconcile how you're thinking about this whole thing. That's why the resurrection is central. And so Paul is willing to take a little bit of time on this. So I'll take just a little bit of time myself. Let's ask this question. Is Jesus' resurrection real? Paul decides to outline it, and I'll outline it just a little bit for you too. Jesus lived. We know that. Everybody agrees on that. Jesus of Nazareth was a human being. He's recorded in history far beyond biblical and even religious accounts. He lived on planet Earth. Jesus died. Everybody agrees that Jesus died. Right? Essentially, everybody agrees that Jesus died on a Roman cross outside of Jerusalem. There's controversy among some about whether Jesus rose from the dead. So this becomes the question. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Because if he did, then you should go with him. And if he didn't, you should not go with him. And so Paul belabors this a little bit. Here's what he says. He says he was raised on the third day. This was according to the scriptures. He's saying the old covenant actually predicted this multiple times. In Jesus' own teaching, he predicted it multiple times. So it's the fulfillment of a prophecy. It says, and that he appeared to Cephas. Cephas is another name for Peter. So Peter was one of the first that Jesus appeared to. And then he appeared to the 12 apostles, which included Thomas. You remember doubting Thomas? Thomas who said, I can't believe it. Man doesn't come back to life. Like, let me see. And he's like, oh, I see. And you remember what Thomas's response was when he saw Jesus alive after he died? He said, my Lord and my God. Because if a man can come from heaven, predict his own death, burial, and resurrection, and then pull it off, he is God. And Thomas realized it. It wasn't just to these 12. It wasn't just this secret meeting. It wasn't a group that got in a room and decided this is the story that we're going to tell. He says after that, he appeared to more than 500 of brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. Here's what he's saying. Go talk to them. They're still alive. They saw him. He really did come back from the dead. It's true that the people in power, the Jewish religious leaders and the Roman government leaders both have a lot of reason to deny that Jesus came back from the dead. That they would love to cover this up and for some other story to be told. I know that's true, and they have a powerful PR machine. But you go talk to these 500 people. They're still alive. They saw him. It was true. Then he appeared to James. James was Jesus' own brother. James was not a believer that his brother was the Son of God before the resurrection. But James, Jesus' own brother, was a believer that Jesus was the Son of God after the resurrection. Then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also, Paul. He says, now, I'm one of the eyewitnesses. And you should know, right, about my story. Now, I don't know if all of you remember Paul's story. He was the Christian conqueror. He was the killer of Christians. That's who he was. I'm not saying it too strongly if I was to suggest to you that he was an Osama bin Laden type figure in the way that Osama bin Laden hated the West, hated America, was bent on destroying it. That's who Paul was to Christians. And then he had an encounter with the resurrected Jesus. And after that encounter, he became the greatest missionary for Christians that the world had ever known. This would be as if Osama bin Laden, after a single encounter with someone, now became the greatest advocate for the West. I mean, it's unbelievable. And Paul's saying, I'm the one writing this to you. I saw him. He's alive. He talks later in this passage about all the hell he goes through. All the pain and suffering, all the fights he has, he was stoned, he was beaten, he was left for dead. He's like, I don't do this for a lie. And Christianity in its first 2 centuries took off like crazy because people encountered a man, that's what's important, who had conquered death itself. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. That's Jesus' resurrection. So then Paul goes on to say, if Jesus' resurrection, let's talk about our resurrection then. So here's the next question. Is our resurrection real? Our resurrection. I don't know if you've thought about it this way. Some people grew up in churches that never talked about this, but the resurrection is not just the resurrection of Jesus. The whole idea behind the resurrection of Jesus is that it was prototypical for the resurrection that you and I have the chance to experience as well. In the same way that Jesus was resurrected, it's the same kind of body he had in his resurrection is what you and I have the opportunity to experience after we physically die, or as Paul started to call it after the resurrection, falling asleep. Here's how he talks about it for us. He says, for since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. For as in Adam all die, so in Christ we will all be made alive. Now this is not as complicated as it might sound. Every now and then, pretty often I'll put up this creation, broken, redemption, restoration thing. And every time I talk about creation, I say, Adam and Eve sinned, but Greg and Jenny would have done the same thing, right? And it's not just Greg and Jenny, it's all of you too, right? Can I just get some verbal agreement that you're all awful? Okay, good. So, what Adam did, it was prototypical for me and for you. Some people call it original sin. Some people call it the curse. Some people call it, but it came through a man, and we just keep doing it. And here's what Paul's saying. That's all true. That's the story of the brokenness of this world. But here's what else is true. Now that Christ has come and defeated death and risen from the dead, Jesus was raised from the dead, and Greg and Jenny are going to be raised from the dead too. That's what it means. And it's not just Greg and Jenny. It's all of you too. It's all of you. Well, maybe all of you. He describes it here. He says, but in each in turn, Christ, the first fruits, Christ goes first, and then when he comes, when he returns again, those who belong to him. And I just love that phrasing. Because this is relationship phrasing. This is covenant phrasing. This is identity phrasing. This isn't just about wearing a title of Christian. Yes, I'm a Christian, I'm a churchgoer, or whatever. No. That's not what this is. This is people who worship Jesus. We belong to him. We made a covenant. We said, Christ, everything I have is yours. And thank God, everything you have is mine. I belong to you. It's the same kind of language that Paul uses when he talks about marriage. He would say, Greg, you belong to Jenny, and Jenny belongs to you. Like there's something you belong. And for everyone who belongs to Christ, death is not the end. Our hope is beyond that. And then he starts to describe with some detail actually about what's that actually going to mean for you and me and our bodies. He says, so will it be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown perishable will be raised imperishable. Perishable means it was able to be killed. Imperishable means it can never be killed. It will live forever. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. That's the brokenness and the restoration. It is sown in weakness. And it is, isn't it? I mean, you just think about your body. Just think about the body of your mom or your dad or your child who's home tonight, a little bit sick. I told you I turned 45 last week, right? I've been so proud of my health. So proud. I'm not like the strongest person. That's not like a pride point, but I'm just a healthy person. And all of a sudden, like I don't wear glasses. Have you ever heard me brag about that before? No contacts, no nothing. I have awesome eyesight. And now, like when it's just a little dark in the room, it's like, somebody turn the lights on in here so I can, like the body just breaks down. And some of you have it really tough. I mean, some of you take a lot of medication. And some of you have just a debilitating experience with pain. And some of you have what's called chronic disease. Chronic meaning it's never going to end. But it is going to end. That's the promise for you and for I. That long after this world is gone, we will be raised with a new body that was sown in weakness, but is raised in power. It's sown a natural body, but it's raised a spiritual body. What does that mean? Does it mean we're all going to be floating around like ghosts? No, that is not what it means. It doesn't mean that you become a spirit or your soul just floats around. That is not what it means. That's not what Jesus was when he was resurrected. It's not what you're going to be either. Your body will probably be like Jesus was when it was resurrected. And then, so it's a body. You know, one of the things that I get to have conversations with people about from time to time, and I think maybe the spiritual natural gets at it, is to help people see at your core, you're a spiritual being in a physical body, right? But a lot of times the physical body that you have and I have, sometimes it actually limits thinking of ourselves in spiritual ways or limits our spiritual nature. You remember in the scriptures where Jesus said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And surely many of you have felt that at some point in your life, maybe multiple times this week. My spirit is willing, my soul wants to do this, but I'm not strong enough. I don't think I can pull that off. It's those kind of things that will never happen again because you will be defined by the spiritual and your body will just go along with it. Now, why is all this resurrection talk so important? In some ways, in today's modern world and a world of enlightenment thinking, scientific understanding, which I absolutely respect and buy into, this might seem like fancy talk, right? About what are people projecting is going to happen? But it's not. It's rooted in the event of Jesus' resurrection, and it really matters for how we shape our lives. So here's the other piece of good news. The good news is hope changes the trajectory of everything. I'm telling you, my friends, that if you live your life anchored in the resurrection, Christ's resurrection and your future resurrection, it changes everything. Everything. I was reading an article this past week. This is so wild to me. There's early last century, early in the 1900s, there were some places in Oklahoma that they were in fear were going to really get wiped out because of droughts, and they decided they needed to build some reservoirs. So they'd put up a dam and let part of the river flow into it. But in a couple of circumstances, there were already towns established where the reservoir needed to go. And so in order to build the reservoir, it meant that a town was going to be wiped out. And so they decided they needed to do it, and the town was going to be wiped out, and they went ahead and made the provisions for the people who lived there, but the people didn't have to move right away. This was going to be a decade or so long project. And so from the time people knew the town was no longer going to exist to the time it actually no longer existed, people sometimes still lived in that town for some time. But guess what happened in that town during the 10 years of knowing there was no hope for the future? Well, first of all, a whole crowd started to move out. They didn't even want to be there. The crowd that remained, when the gutter fell off the house, guess what? Just leave it. Doesn't matter. I mean, in a few years, the whole thing's going to be gone. People stop maintaining their yards. They stop taking care of things. Just become really dilapidated when there's no hope. But if there is hope, if you're zeroed in on something for the future, friends, that can change everything. That's why the resurrection is the anchor. So Paul says this on the negative side. He says, if the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Right? He says, if you don't believe this, then this philosophy of life seems perfect. If there's nothing beyond the grave, if we die and we're done, then just enjoy every moment you can. Squeeze every moment of happiness into this life. Experience every experience you can experience in the here and now. Go and grab every material blessing and take it for your own. Do those kind of things. And then the moment I start to describe how you should live if there is no afterlife, I start to think, that's how most of us live. We try to squeeze the most happiness into every moment here. We try to gain every experience we can have here, hoping that we won't miss out. We try to rack up all the material possessions that we can have so we don't miss out. I think that's a perfect way to live if there's no resurrection. But if there's resurrection, it doesn't make any sense. You see, you can actually rank your hopes. This won't be complicated. You all understand this. There's a baseball game going on right now between the Cubs and the Cardinals, right? Like probably by the time I walk off this platform, I'll be disappointed. Now, I was going to say I'd be disappointed if the Cardinals won only because I couldn't give it to you in the Commons area afterwards, but I really won't be disappointed if the Cardinals win. Some of us hope one team will win and some of us hope the other team. That's one level of hope, right? But for most of us, because we try not to take it too seriously, we think, in the end, that's not that big a deal. Your hopes for your son or your daughter are way bigger than who wins a game tonight. Your hopes for them getting into a certain college. Your hopes for them finding the right mate. Some of you have great hopes that your son or daughter will break up with the person they're with right now. And if I think, hey, would you trade the victory in the game tonight for your son or daughter fulfilling those hopes, you'd trade that one for sure. Some people build their whole life around, hey, I hope to one day, I'd like to retire early. I'd like to travel with my spouse and kind of see the world, do the things people love to do. We have hopes, and there's nothing wrong with these hopes. These are not bad hopes. They're earthly hopes, but they're not bad hopes. For my mom and dad, they wanted to retire early and travel and see the world. Now, they had their fair share of experiences even before they retired where they got to travel together, and they loved it. And my dad had a successful business. He sold the business when he was 59 years old. And they were set up to go do what they had hoped to do. And within months after selling the business, my dad got sick. And then he went through a lot of different sicknesses. And they didn't get to travel very much. And he lived for 8 more years before he died. A lot of them with mom caring for him. And this is one of the things I respect about my mom so much. I'd say, Mom, that sucks. Right? Like you planned, you prepared, but you didn't get to realize the hope. And she would look me back in the eye and she would say, yeah, it sucks, but it's okay. It's okay. And the reason she can say it's okay is because of what Paul writes next. He says, where, O death, is your victory? Where, O death, is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law, but thanks be to God, he gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Because my mom, nothing moves her. I mean, she is anchored in this future hope, a future reality to her that she would have loved to experience a number of things on this earth before my dad died. But she knows there's a reunion coming one day. There are experiences to be shared together again one day. And it's hard to explain it if you only think of life in terms of today. But if you can imagine eternity with resurrected bodies, with death defeated, and forever with God, man, that ranks at the top of the hope food chain. And so Paul says this: therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Let nothing move you. Your boat, your life, it is going to go up and down with the waves. There are going to be amazing things that might happen in your life, and there are going to be some horrible things that happen in your life. You will ride them up and down, but let nothing move you. I was thinking about all the things I've had friends walk through that from a human perspective have every reason to jostle that anchor out of the foundation and set things free. And I have so much respect for all my friends who walk through with this resurrection vision. And it means, this is what it means. It means the diagnosis doesn't move them. And it means that even though they were betrayed, it doesn't move them. And it means even though the business took off and now they're a millionaire, it doesn't move them. It means nothing moves them. Nothing has to move me. Nothing has to move you. It's because he lives that we can face tomorrow. It's because he lives that our hope is there. It's because he lives that we know who holds the future. I want to pray for nothing to move us right now. God, for those of us in the room who are followers of Jesus, I thank you for Jesus' resurrection and how powerful that is as a promise then of what is to come for us. I pray nothing moves us. God, for those who aren't followers of Jesus in the room, I pray they'll consider this. Not just these ideas, God, but exploring realities about your Son's resurrection and opening themselves to you and your promises. I pray this in Jesus' name.